I still remember the exact sound the door made when my sister left. It wasn't a slam. That's what people always assume when I tell this story. They picture something dramatic, something loud, a door hitting its frame so hard the windows rattled. But it wasn't like that. It was quiet. A soft click, the kind you hear when someone is trying not to wake a sleeping house. Except it was 2 in the afternoon, and Marigold was sitting on the kitchen floor eating crackers, and she was 3 years old, and her mother had just walked out with a duffel bag and a man named Trent, who drove a Dodge pickup with a cracked side mirror. I watched from the window. I don't know why I didn't go after her. Maybe I already knew. My name is Claire. I'm 39 now. At the time this started, I was 31, living in a 2-bedroom rental in Asheville, North Carolina, working as a medical billing coordinator for a physical therapy clinic. I had a savings account that was doing okay, but not great, a cat named Biscuit who hated everyone but me, and a life that was quiet in a way I'd chosen deliberately. I wasn't lonely. I want to be clear about that. I had friends. I had a routine I loved. I jogged on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I kept fresh flowers on my kitchen table because they made me happy, and there was no one to tell me that was a waste of money. I was fine. And then my sister Danny called me on a Wednesday night in October, and she said she needed me to watch Marigold for a few days while she sorted some things out, and I said yes before she even finished the sentence, because that's what I always did with Danny. That's what our whole family did. You said yes to Danny because saying anything else took more energy than most people had. She dropped Marigold off the next morning with a car seat, a trash bag full of clothes, and a Ziploc bag of goldfish crackers. She did not come back in a few days. She didn't come back for 6 years. I want to be honest about those first weeks, because it would be easy to paint them as something warmer than they were. It was hard. It was genuinely, achingly hard in ways I hadn't anticipated. Marigold cried for her mother every night for the first month. Not screaming, hysterical crying. She was too young to fully understand what was happening. But this quiet, repetitive thing, almost like a chant. Mama, mama, mama. She'd say it into the dark of the bedroom I'd converted for her, and I'd sit on the edge of her little bed and rub her back and say things like, Mama loves you so much, she just had to go take care of something. And I'd mean it kindly, but I also wasn't sure I believed it. I called Danny 37 times in the first 2 months. I counted. I kept a notes app log because I'm that kind of person. I write things down when I feel like I'm losing control of a situation. 17 of those calls went to voicemail. 12, she answered and gave me some version of, I'm working on it, Claire, just give me more time. 8, she didn't pick up but texted back later, things like, I know, I know, I know, or please, just a little longer. I told my mother. My mother, who lives in Greensboro, who has always had a particular way of absorbing difficult information without actually doing anything about it, said, Danny's going through a hard time, Claire. You know how she gets. And I said, Mom, she left her 3-year-old with me and disappeared. And my mother said, she didn't disappear. She needs space to figure herself out. That was the moment I understood I was going to be doing this alone. Not alone. I had people around me. My friend Sasha, who worked at the same clinic, started coming over on Saturday mornings to help me figure out the logistics of suddenly having a toddler. She'd bring coffee and sit at my kitchen table and help me research preschools and look up what 3-year-olds were supposed to be eating and whether the tantrums Marigold was having were normal or something I should be worried about. They were normal, it turned out. She was grieving in the way a 3-year-old grieves, through her body, through her behavior, through the way she'd go completely rigid when I tried to change her routine. There's something no one tells you about becoming an unexpected caregiver. It's not just the logistics, though those are enormous. It's the identity shift. One morning, you're a woman who wakes up slowly, makes coffee, sits in silence, and thinks her own thoughts. The next morning, you're someone else entirely. You're the person who wakes up to small feet padding down the hallway. You're the person who has to be regulated so that a small child can regulate. You're the person who cannot fall apart even when you desperately want to because there are small eyes on you all the time, learning how to be in the world by watching how you are in it. I didn't resent Marigold. I want to say that clearly. Not once, not ever. She is, one of the most extraordinary people I have ever known. Even at 3, she had this particular quality of attention. She would look at you like she was really seeing you, like she was filing you away somewhere important. She used to pick up small things off the ground, a button, a bottle cap, a piece of blue sea glass, and carry them around for days like they were precious. She had opinions about everything: which cup she wanted her water in, which song she wanted me to sing at night, whether the crackers should be on a plate or in a bowl. I loved her immediately. That part wasn't complicated. What was complicated was everything around it. I had to get legal guardianship, which meant navigating a system I knew nothing about with a lawyer I could barely afford, while working full-time and trying to act like everything was fine so my boss wouldn't think I was falling apart. I had to enroll Marigold in preschool. I had to figure out health insurance. I had to call Danny's last known address, which turned out to be an apartment in Charlotte she'd already vacated, and explain to a tired-sounding woman who answered the door that I was looking for my sister and I was sorry to bother her. I kept the Notes app going. Every call, every attempt, every non-response. I don't know why I did that. At the time, I told myself it was just my nature. I'm organized, I keep records. It calms me to have documentation of things. But I think somewhere in a part of myself I wasn't ready to look at directly, I already understood that there might come a day when I'd need proof of everything I'd done. I just didn't know then what I'd need it for. By the time Marigold was 5, she had stopped asking where her mother was. That's the thing that broke my heart the quietest. Not a dramatic moment, not a conversation where she looked up at me with big eyes and asked me something I didn't know how to answer. Just one day she stopped asking. And I noticed the absence of the question the way you notice when a sound that's always been in the background suddenly isn't there anymore. The hum of a refrigerator that's finally been unplugged. She called me Aunt Claire. We were clear on that. I didn't want to confuse her, and I didn't want to pretend to be something I wasn't. Her mother was her mother. I was Aunt Claire. But Aunt Claire was the one who took her to the pediatrician and sat in the plastic chair next to the exam table and held her hand when she got her flu shot. Aunt Claire was the one who learned to do her hair. Marigold has this gorgeous, thick, coily hair that I had no idea what to do with at first, and I spent an embarrassing amount of time on YouTube and eventually found a woman named Keisha at a salon 2 neighborhoods over who didn't make me feel stupid for not knowing and who showed me exactly what to do and who became, over the years, a person I genuinely considered a friend. Aunt Claire was the one at every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every Halloween, every Christmas morning, every fever at 2 in the morning, every nightmare, every first loose tooth. My own life had reshaped itself entirely around hers. I stopped jogging Tuesdays and Thursdays because drop-off was at 7:45. I traded my quiet Saturday mornings for cartoons and pancakes with shapes cut into them because Marigold went through a phase where she would only eat food that was shaped like something: a star, a heart, a dinosaur, whatever I could manage with a cookie cutter and enough patience. I gave up my second bedroom permanently. I stopped dating, mostly, not because I decided to, but because by the time Marigold was in bed and the dishes were done and the next day's lunch was packed, I had nothing left. I wasn't resentful about any of it. I want to keep saying that because I think people expect me to have been, and I wasn't. I was tired, yes, stretched thin, yes, but I was also more purposeful than I had ever felt in my life. What I did resent, what I let myself feel, quietly, when Marigold was asleep and the apartment was dark and I was sitting on the couch with my tea going cold, was my family's silence. Not one person stepped in to help, not in any consistent, meaningful way. My mother visited twice a year, brought gifts, played with Marigold for an afternoon, and then drove back to Greensboro. My aunts sent Christmas cards. My cousin Bev, who I'd always been close with, called occasionally and said things like, "I don't know how you do it, Claire, I really don't," in a tone that sounded like admiration, but functioned as a substitute for actually doing anything. No one offered to take Marigold for a weekend so I could sleep. No one sent money. No one said, "This is not fair to you, and we see that." And Danny sent a text every few months, sometimes a voicemail. She was in Nashville for a while, then she was in Phoenix. She was getting herself together, she said. She was working on things. She loved Marigold so much, she said, and one day she was going to make it right. I stopped responding to most of it after the first year, not out of anger exactly, more of a kind of emotional self-preservation. Every time I engaged with Danny's version of events, this narrative where she was a person in recovery, doing her best, moving towards something better, I'd spent 2 or 3 days afterwards feeling hollowed out. Because the reality in my apartment was a 5-year-old who needed new shoes and had a developmental screening on Thursday and was struggling with reading readiness and had just finally stopped sleeping through the night without calling for me. Danny's feelings about herself were not something I had bandwidth for. There was one moment, around when Marigold was 4.5, when I almost broke. I'd had a terrible week at work. We'd switched billing software, and the entire system had been a mess for days, and I'd missed a deadline and gotten a talking to from my supervisor, which had never happened to me before. I came home and Marigold had had a hard day at preschool, something about another kid taking her stuffed animal, and she was fragile and clingy, and I was out of patience in a way that scared me. I raised my voice, not horribly, not in a way that would look alarming on paper, but sharper than I meant to, and I saw her face change, this quick flicker of something, surprise, maybe, hurt, and then she just got very still and quiet. I sat down on the kitchen floor right there and cried. She came over after a minute and put her small hand on my arm and said, "It's okay, Aunt Claire. Sometimes I get frustrated, too." 4.5 years old, consoling me. I pulled myself together. I made dinner. I read her 3 books instead of 2. After she was asleep, I sat on the couch and I let myself feel the full weight of it. The exhaustion, the loneliness, the specific grief of doing this important thing entirely without a partner, without backup, without anyone saying, "I see you, you're doing a good job, keep going." And then I got up the next morning and I kept going, because that's what you do. There was something else happening during those years, something I didn't know about, that I'd find out about much later. My Uncle Gerald, my father's older brother, a retired contractor who'd made a quiet fortune in land and property in western North Carolina, had been watching. He wasn't a man who said much. He came to family gatherings and sat at the edge of things and listened more than he talked. He'd never had children of his own. He'd been married once, briefly, in his 30s, and after that he'd just lived alone with his dogs and his land, and a contentment that seemed genuine. He visited me once when Marigold was about 4, drove up from Hendersonville without calling first, which was just his way, sat at my kitchen table and drank coffee, and watched Marigold play on the floor with her blocks. He didn't say much. When he left, he shook my hand. Actually shook my hand, which was strange enough that I remembered it. He died when Marigold was 7. Heart attack, quick. He was 71, and by all accounts, he didn't suffer. And that's when everything changed. I didn't know it yet, but that's when the thing I'd need to protect myself from was set into motion, and the thing I'd need to protect Marigold from, too. Because Gerald, in his quiet, watching way, had done something none of the rest of us had known about. And the moment certain people found out, the clock started ticking.
Gerald left an estate worth a little over $1.2 million. I didn't know the number right away. The call from his attorney, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Aldridge, who operated out of a small office in Hendersonville, came about 3 weeks after the funeral. He asked me to come in, said there was something I needed to know. I thought, honestly, that maybe Gerald had left me a small bequest, a piece of furniture maybe, or a token amount, something sentimental. He'd always been kind to me in his wordless way, and I'd appreciated that, but we weren't close by any typical definition. I drove down on a Thursday, took the day off work, brought Marigold with me because school was out for a teacher workday. She sat in a chair in the waiting room and drew in her sketchbook. She'd gotten very into drawing by then, elaborate little worlds with their own characters and rules, while Mr. Aldridge explained what Gerald had done. He'd left his house and land, valued at roughly $800,000 at the time of his death, to a wildlife conservation organization he'd been quietly supporting for years. That was the bulk of it. The rest, $412,000 in various accounts, he'd divided in his will. A portion to his church, a portion to a former employee he'd kept in touch with, and then a trust of $220,000, set up for Marigold. Not for the family, not for Danny, not for my mother, for Marigold specifically, in her name, with conditions. The trust was structured so that it couldn't be accessed until Marigold turned 25 or until she completed a 4-year degree, whichever came first. There was a provision for educational expenses before that, tuition, books, a reasonable living stipend, but those funds were administered by the trustee, which was Mr. Aldridge's firm, and they required documentation. No one could just walk in and request the money. It wasn't sitting somewhere accessible. It was protected, deliberately, in a way that suggested Gerald had thought carefully about exactly who might try to get their hands on it. He'd also named me as Marigold's guardian of record in the trust document, in language that was separate from but consistent with the legal guardianship I'd already established. I sat in that office for a long time after Mr. Aldridge finished talking. Marigold was still in the waiting room, drawing. I could see her through the glass partition. "Did he ever say anything to you?" I asked Mr. Aldridge. "About why?" He paused, choosing his words. "He said he'd seen what needed to be seen," he told me, "and that he wanted to make sure the right person was protected." I drove home in a kind of quiet shock. Not unpleasant, but disorienting in the way that any significant thing is disorienting, when you've been moving through your life with your head down and something suddenly causes you to look up. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother, not Sasha, not anyone. I don't know exactly why I kept it to myself at first. Partly I was still processing it. Partly I had a feeling, and I've learned over the years to trust those feelings, that information like this needed to be held carefully, that the moment certain people found out about it, something would shift in a way I wouldn't be able to unshift. I was right about that. For about 8 months, no one knew. Life continued the way it had been continuing. Marigold started 2nd grade. She had a teacher she loved, a woman named Miss Patterson, who recognized immediately that Marigold was bright in a specific way that needed specific encouragement, and who started giving her extra books to take home. Marigold read them all. She was 7 going on 40, Sasha used to say, and it was accurate. She had started asking me questions about things I had to look up, about how stars were formed, about why some languages had different alphabets, about whether animals had feelings the way people did. "I think they do," she told me very seriously one evening at dinner. "I think they just can't tell us yet." She'd stopped calling for her mother in years, but occasionally she'd say something that reminded me the wound was still there, just quiet. Once, at a birthday party for a classmate, a well-meaning woman who didn't know our situation said in that reflexive way adults talk to children, "Is your mom here today?" And Marigold had said without missing a beat, "I live with my Aunt Claire." Just that. No elaboration, no visible distress. But that night she was quieter than usual, and when I tucked her in, she held my hand an extra moment before she let go. I held it as long as she needed. The call from Danny came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was at work, at my desk, eating a yogurt I'd remembered to bring from home, which felt like a small personal victory. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't immediately recognize. She'd changed numbers again, but the area code registered somewhere in the back of my mind, and I stepped out into the hallway and answered it. "Claire?" Her voice was different, steadier than I remembered, more deliberate. "I've been thinking a lot, and I think it's time for me to come home." I didn't say anything for a moment. "I'm in a good place now," she continued. "I've been clean for 14 months. I'm working. I have an apartment. I've been doing therapy, real therapy, and my therapist thinks I'm ready to start rebuilding some of my relationships, including with Marigold." I want to tell you what I felt in that moment, because I think it's important, and I think it's complicated. Part of me felt something that might have been hope, the small, stubborn part that had never fully stopped hoping for Danny, because she was my sister, and I'd loved her my whole life, and loving someone doesn't just turn itself off even when they've let you down as profoundly as she'd let all of us down. I felt that. I won't pretend I didn't. But another part of me, the part that had been awake at 2 in the morning for 6 years, the part that had sat in plastic chairs in doctors' offices and parent-teacher conferences and lawyers' offices, the part that watched a little girl slowly, painstakingly put herself back together after being left, that part was very still and very careful. I said, "That's good, Danny. I'm glad you're in a better place. I want to see her, Claire. I want to be her mother again." There it was. Be her mother again. As if motherhood was something you could leave in a bag and pick back up. As if Marigold had been in storage while Danny figured out her life. I kept my voice neutral. "Let's talk more about this. Not on the phone, in person." "Of course," she said, and her voice had this warmth in it, this openness that made me feel simultaneously relieved and guarded. "Of course, I can come whenever." What I didn't know yet was that she already knew about the trust. I found that out later, much later, when I pieced it together. My mother had mentioned it to someone, an aunt, who had mentioned it to a cousin, who had mentioned it to Danny. The information had traveled the way information always travels in families, through the informal channels that everyone pretends don't exist. By the time Danny called me, she'd known about the money for at least 2 months. I didn't know that on the phone, but I knew something. I knew it the way I'd known standing at the window in October 7 years earlier, watching a Dodge pickup with a cracked side mirror pull away, that I was not going to see my sister for a very long time. Some things you just know. The meeting started cautiously. I was firm about that. Cautious, supervised, public. Coffee shops at first, then a park. I sat close by and watched, like you watch for weather. Danny was good with Marigold, I'll give her that. She had a gentleness with her that was real. Marigold was wary at first, in that animal way children are wary of things they can't fully name. She was polite. She asked questions her mother questions the way she asked everyone questions, with genuine curiosity but no particular attachment yet. It was like watching her take the measure of a stranger, because that's what Danny was. Danny started pushing for more after about 2 months. More time, overnight visits, holidays. She got an apartment in Asheville. Convenient, I thought, that she chose Asheville specifically when she'd been in 3 other states over the past 6 years. She decorated Marigold's room, she told me. She'd gotten a bed and some art for the walls, and she wanted Marigold to feel at home there. And she said something to me at one of our coffee meetings that I've thought about many times since. She leaned forward over her cup and said with her eyes very warm and sincere, "Claire, I know I can never repay what you've done for her, but she's my mother. I should be the one raising her." I looked at her. "She's 8. She's been with me for 5 years. Her school is here. Her friends are here. Her whole life is here." "I know," Danny said. "I'm not trying to disrupt her. I miss her. I want to be in her life in a real way." "She's in your life. We're making that happen." Danny nodded. She sipped her coffee. She said, "I'm going to talk to a family lawyer, just to understand my rights, not to fight you, Claire, just so I know where I stand." She smiled when she said it. I smiled back. And that evening I went home and I called my own lawyer. If there's one thing those years had taught me, it's that silence is not the same as peace, and patience is not the same as passivity. I had been patient. I had been silent in 1,000 ways that cost me, but I was not passive. I opened the Notes app. All the entries were still there. 37 calls in the first 2 months, every voicemail I'd saved, every text she'd sent, the ones that added up to years of absence. All of it still there, organized by date, because I had been writing things down since the beginning. Marigold was in her room drawing. I could hear her humming, a made-up song, something she did when she was happy and didn't know she was doing it. I held my phone and I listened to her hum, and I thought,
The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in November. I'd been prepared for something like it since the summer. My lawyer, a woman named Diane, who'd been practicing family law in Buncombe County for over 20 years and who had a way of explaining the worst possible scenarios so matter-of-factly that they became almost manageable, had told me early on that Danny had a real case. Not an easy case, not a certain one, but a real one. Because she was Marigold's biological mother, and she'd been sober for over a year, and she had stable housing and employment, and family courts have a general preference for biological parents when the situation permits. What we have, Diane told me, is time and documentation, and those are not small things. I gave her everything. The Notes app, exported and printed, 84 pages of dated entries, the voicemails I'd saved, which her office had transcribed, the texts, the guardianship records, school records going back to preschool, medical records, 3 letters from teachers, 2 from Marigold's pediatrician, a letter from Miss Patterson, Marigold's second-grade teacher, who wrote 4 pages about Marigold's stability and growth and the specificity of the support system that had allowed it. A letter from Keisha, the woman who did Marigold's hair, which she'd insisted on writing herself, and which made me cry when I read it. And a statement from Mr. Aldridge. That one was important, because Gerald's trust had been structured in a specific way. Not a coincidence, I came to understand, but a deliberate protection. Gerald had named me, in a separate letter held by his attorney, as the adult he considered most responsible for Marigold's welfare. He'd written it 2 years before he died. He hadn't told anyone. He'd just done it and kept it quietly in the file. Mr. Aldridge brought it to Diane's attention when he understood what was happening. He felt Gerald would have wanted it used. I read that letter once in Diane's office, and then I set it down because I didn't trust myself to hold it together if I kept reading. Gerald had written, in his plain, careful way, that he had watched my sister leave a child in someone else's care without so much as a plan, and he had watched me rearrange my entire life to provide that child with stability, love, and consistency. He had written, "Claire does not perform love. She just does what love requires. I believe that is rarer than most people recognize." He was 71 years old, and he lived alone with his dogs and his land, and he had seen something clearly that everyone else in my family had managed to look away from for years. I thought about him a lot in those weeks before the hearing. Danny's lawyer argued that she had completed her recovery, demonstrated sustained sobriety, established a stable home, and that as Marigold's mother, she had a fundamental right to raise her own child. They argued that my guardianship had always been intended as temporary, though that word temporary was doing a lot of heavy lifting, given that it had been 6 years. They argued that Marigold deserved her mother. That last one landed hard in the room, the way it was designed to, and I understood its power. I'd said similar things to Marigold myself over the years. Her mother loves her mother wants what's best for her, because I believed it, or I'd wanted to. But there's a difference between wanting what's best for someone and being willing to do what that requires, especially when what it requires is hard. The judge ordered a guardian ad litem for Marigold, a separate attorney to represent her interests specifically. The GAL spent 2 months doing interviews. She spoke to Marigold's teachers, her pediatrician, her therapist. I'd gotten Marigold into therapy at 7, not because she was in crisis, but because I wanted her to have a safe place to process her life, and it had been enormously helpful. She spoke to Sasha. She spoke to Keisha. She spoke to me at length across 2 separate meetings. And she spoke to Marigold. I was not in the room for that. I sat in the hallway of the guardian ad litem's office on a blue plastic chair, and I read the same 3 pages of a magazine without absorbing any of it, and I waited. Marigold came out after 45 minutes. She looked fine, thoughtful. She came and sat next to me and leaned slightly against my arm, which is what she did when she was tired or thinking hard about something. "How was that?" I said, keeping my voice light. "Good," she said. "She asked me a lot of questions." "That's her job." "I know." A pause. "She asked me where I felt like home." I kept my face still. "What did you say?" Marigold looked at me with that look she'd had since she was 3, the one that saw you, really saw you. She said, "I said with you. I said home is where Aunt Claire is." I nodded. I put my arm around her. We sat there for a minute. "Is that okay?" she asked. "It's exactly right," I said. "Whatever you feel is exactly right." She nodded, satisfied, and pulled out her sketchbook. The GAL's report was 40 pages. I read every word. It noted that primary residents remain with me, with a structured and supervised visitation schedule to be expanded over time as Danny demonstrated consistency. It noted Marigold's strong attachment to me, the stability of her environment, the quality of her schooling, her emotional health, and the concerning length and nature of Danny's absence. It also noted the trust specifically, that a large sum of money had been placed in Marigold's name by a relative who clearly had observed the situation closely. It did not make a legal argument from this, but it named it as evidence of something. Danny's lawyer asked for the proceedings to be delayed, something about wanting more time for mediation. Diane said no. The judge agreed. The hearing lasted 1 day. When it was over, when the judge had spoken and we were filing out into the November air and the parking lot was cold and flat and ordinary the way parking lots are even when everything inside you is shaking, Danny came to stand beside me. Her lawyer was a few steps behind, talking on his phone. It was just us for a moment. The two of us, in the cold, the sisters we had always been underneath all the years and everything that had happened between them. She looked tired. Not defeated, but tired in a deep way. "Claire," she said. "Danny." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you know about the trust before you started the guardianship process?" "No," I said. "I found out after." She nodded. She looked down at her shoes. "I told myself it wasn't about the money," she said, quietly. I didn't say anything to that. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. Maybe partly it was. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in 6 years, maybe in much longer. "I know you love her," I said. "I've never told her otherwise." She nodded, and then she did something I didn't expect. She said, "Thank you for everything you did for her that no one asked you to do." I looked at her. I thought about all the things I could say, the nights, the calls, the 37 attempts, the years of giving everything I had to a child that deserved someone to give everything. She's worth it. And I walked to my car.
That was 2 years ago. Marigold is 10 now. She is sharp and funny, and she has her mother's eyes and her own everything else. She's reading books meant for 14-year-olds, and she has opinions about them that she will share with you for as long as you are willing to listen. She has 3 best friends and a sketchbook that she's filled entirely. We framed the cover of the last one and hung it in the hallway because it was too beautiful to just close and put on a shelf. She still hums when she draws. She still carries small found objects around for days. She found a piece of pink quartz at a state park last summer, and it's been on her nightstand ever since, right next to her library books and her lamp. She sees Danny on the first and third weekends of every month, consistent now for over a year. It's going better than I expected, and better than I hoped, which is a strange thing to sit with. I find that I mean it when I say I hope it keeps going well. There are moments when I watch Marigold come back from a weekend at Danny's and her face has something new in it, some small, tentative thing she's adding to her sense of herself and where she comes from, and I feel something I can only describe as relief. Not for my sake, for hers. She needs to know where she comes from, even when where she comes from is complicated. Danny and I are not close. We are not unfriendly. We are two women who love the same child and are learning to be in the same world around that fact. She texts me sometimes, small things. How did Marigold's soccer tryout go? Does she still like that brand of granola bar? I answer. Occasionally, we sit in the same bleachers at school events and make conversation. It is careful and real, and I think it is what we are able to manage, and I have made my peace with that. My mother asked me at Christmas last year if I was angry. I thought about that for a real moment before I answered. Not performed consideration, actual thought. No, I said, not anymore. You should be, she said, what Danny put you through. Mom, I said, and I said it gently because she's my mother and she carries her own guilt about all of it in her own way. Anger's expensive. I don't carry things that cost more than they're worth. She was quiet. Then she said, You turned out so well, Claire. I don't know if I ever told you that. It wasn't an apology, but for my mother it was adjacent to one, and I took it for what it was. Sasha got married this past spring, and Marigold was a junior bridesmaid, which she took extremely seriously. She had opinions about the flower arrangement, and she was right about it, and Sasha's photographer got a picture of the two of them laughing about something at the reception that I have as my phone wallpaper now. I started running again. Not on Tuesdays and Thursdays specifically, just when I feel like it, when there's space and light and I want to move. That feels better, actually, the choice of it. The trust sits where it has always sat, carefully managed, growing quietly, protected. Marigold knows about it in a general way. I told her when she was 9, in simple terms. Your great-uncle Gerald loved you and wanted to help you with your future, and when you're older there will be money for school and getting started in your life. She thought about this for a moment and then said, Did he know me? And I told her yes. He visited once, and he watched her play with her blocks, and he shook my hand when he left. She seemed satisfied by that. She went back to her book. I think about what Gerald wrote sometimes, that I don't perform love, I just do what love requires. I've turned that over a lot in the past 2 years. I'm not sure I agree that it's as rare as he thought it was. I think a lot of people do what love requires, quietly, without recognition, without anyone shaking their hand or writing it down. I think there are a lot of women who have rearranged their lives for someone else's child and never had anyone see it clearly. I want them to know I see it. If you've been doing the invisible thing, the thing no one applauds, the thing that costs you sleep and time and the easy version of your life, I want you to know that it matters. The child who grows up steady because you chose to stay steady, that's not nothing. That's everything, actually. Biscuit, the cat, died when Marigold was 6. She was devastated. We had a small funeral in the backyard, which Marigold conducted with the full gravity of a child who understands that endings deserve ceremony. We planted a marigold there, the flower, not the girl, though Marigold the girl helped dig the hole and thought this was the funniest and most perfect thing she had ever heard of. We still have a cat, 2 of them now, actually. Their names are Ptolemy and Fig, chosen by Marigold, who has strong feelings about names. My life is not what I planned. It is fuller than what I planned, more inconvenient, more joyful, more mine in ways I didn't expect, because the things you choose under pressure, the things you stay for when everything in you wants to find it easier, those become yours in a way that nothing effortless ever does. I still keep a notes app, old habit, but these days what I write in it is different. Not evidence, not records of absence, just things I want to remember. The question Marigold asked in the car last Tuesday about whether clouds have a bottom. The way she laughs at her own jokes before she finishes telling them. The pink quartz on the nightstand. Small things, precious things, the kind you carry around for days because they're worth it.
Every story we share here is a piece of a lived truth, finally whispered out loud. If today's journey resonated with you, please subscribe to Quiet Drama Stories and leave a like. Also share your thoughts in the comment section. Your support ensures that these quiet voices are finally heard. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are never as alone as you feel. See you in the next story.